Writers' Court is now in session. You have been brought before me today to answer for one of the most heinous crimes any writer could commit. Indeed, you have chosen to write your novel from the incorrect point of view. If found guilty, your punishment will be swift and severe. How do you plead?
Not guilty, I guess.
Very well.
Choosing a point of view from which to write is one of the simplest decisions an author will make in the run-up to writing their book. And yet, it's one that fills most writers, both new and experienced, with a certain amount of dread. Firstly, it's something that will have a massive impact on the tone of the book and the overall reading experience. A story told from the first-person perspective of someone writing a diary is far, far different than a massive sprawling saga told by an omniscient narrator. And then there's the concern of what is selling right now. Publishing, much like most creative industries, is very trend-led. At a certain time, maybe most contemporary YA books are written from the first-person point of view. Does that mean that most agents and publishers are only really looking for books told from the first-person perspective? Does that mean if you want to give yourself the best chance to succeed, should you be writing from that viewpoint? I can understand the fear of committing to the wrong POV. After all, it's not something that you can easily unpick. You can't change an entire book's POV the way you might find and replace a character's name. You can't just magically change an 80,000 word novel from third person to first person without it becoming a syntactical nightmare. But before we go much further, I want to break down some of the most common viewpoints you'll see in fiction these days. First person. The story is told by the viewpoint character with the I pronoun. He's bloody late again. Well, it's not my fault he'll be drinking room temp tea. Second person, where the reader is addressed directly with the you pronoun, as if they were the viewpoint character. You are careful to only add 1.5 sugars, as was your father's habit. Third person limited, also known as close third person. He said, she said, they said point of view that allows readers to access the thoughts of the viewpoint character. He adds milk with the bag in. Others might think this is madness or sacrilege, but Martin knows this is the secret to a perfect brew. Third person omniscient, where the narrator knows everything that happens at any time. Just around the corner, his twin brother Kevin silently approaches with a hammer, a gift for his 25th birthday. Okay, so I'm at the beginning of planning my new novel, let's say. It's a saga set in a small Southeast Asian country, and it centers on 3 generations of national leaders all belonging to the same family. It tracks the country's uncertain independence in the 1960s, to its emergence as a global powerhouse in the 1990s, and through to the modern day, where there's a battle for succession within the family that highlights the conflict between traditional values and Western-style modernity. Now, I have a decent idea about the plot and the characters and where it's all going, but I'm stuck with this choice paralysis when it comes to picking points of view. Should they all be written from the first person? Or maybe a close third? Or maybe I start with an omniscient narrator for the part set in the past, and then maybe for the section set in the 2000s, I do a sort of experimental bit in second person? It sounds a little bit hard, but it might be impressive if I can pull it off. Oof. There's so much riding on this that I need a second opinion. So let's call Reedsy's head of learning, Bestselling Ghostwriter Tom Bromley. Reedsy phone. Call Tom Bromley.
Hello, this is Tom Bromley. I'm currently busy teaching my novel writing course at Reedsy, so I'll return your call as soon as possible. But in the meantime, would you like to see a preview of my lesson on choosing the right point of view?
Oh, yes please.
Now, there are some great novels told in second person, third person unlimited, and plural. So J. McInerney's Bright Lights, Big City is a good example of a second person novel. John Lanchester's Capital makes good use of a more omniscient viewpoint. And Brown Girls by Daphne Palasi Andreades uses this we formulation to extremely powerful effect. But the vast majority of present day fiction is written in either first person or third person close. So that is where we are going to focus our choice. There's nothing to stop you writing in a different viewpoint to these, but I would personally think long and hard before doing so. Those viewpoints tend to dominate proceedings. Novels written in you or we are also often on the shorter side for a reason. Third Person Unlimited too works if you're wanting a widescreen, epic feel, but can also sometimes feel a little old-fashioned. So John Lanchester's viewpoint for Capital worked because there was a Dickensian element to the writing about the residents of a particular street in London. So don't rule these options out, but proceed with caution here. So let's look in a little bit more detail about what for me are the two main choices, first person or third person close. So what are the advantages of writing in first person? The big positives are intimacy and voice. First person puts the reader right into the thoughts and feelings of the main character, and that really helps to bring out the experiences that that character is going through. First person can also be a little bit easier in creating voice. That's embedded in how that main character views the world. Bridget Jones, Eleanor Oliphant, Lucy Barton, or a Queenie are all good examples of this. The fact that we're right in with this particular character also means that if you're feeling more nefarious, it's easier to manipulate the reader. So for example, if you're planning to use an unreliable narrator, because the reader is seeing the world through this character's eyes, it's much easier to guide the reader in a particular direction. Now the downside of this intimacy that first person brings to the telling is that if you're not careful, it can flip over into claustrophobia. As the reader, you're stuck with this character's viewpoint. So that's great if you like it, but much less so if you're beginning to find it irritating or annoying. First person can also create a challenge for plotting. By necessity, the viewpoint character has to be in every scene, and that might lead you to shoehorning a character into a scene so that the reader can witness it when they might not naturally have been there. Thirdly, you might also have to work harder to bring in other voices and opinions. Now this can be worked around with the use of dialogue, where you get those other voices unfiltered by the protagonist, but again, there might be more work to do here. Finally, there may be issues with your limitations of the character. If your protagonist is an artist, then it would feel natural for them to observe a scene in sparkling detail. But if they're a football hooligan, say, then how much descriptive detail can you realistically include? So what are the advantages and disadvantages of writing in third person close? If first person is all about intimacy, then one of the big advantages of third person is that it affords you more space. That extra little bit of distance allows you to bring in some more depth and perspective. So for example, that can help with description. With third person close, it is easier to include writing elements that might not naturally fit with your viewpoint character. It can also be more advantageous for plotting. In terms of your protagonist choice, rather than having to squeeze a particular character into every scene, you can choose a viewpoint from someone who would naturally be present. It also helps with protagonist switching. Third person close makes it easier to tell the story from different viewpoints, if the story demands it. The main challenge with third person is dealing with the potential lack of intimacy. The flip side of having more space is that it can also create distance between the character and the reader. You may have to work harder to bring out a character's feelings and emotions. And one good way of doing this is to bring in the character's thoughts in a first-person voice, almost like inner dialogue. I wonder what this viewer is making of this video, Tom thought. The other danger with third-person viewpoints is the danger of telling. There's a temptation to tell the reader what is happening rather than showing it through action. And this can lead to the return of the authorial hand, a shadowy narrator in the background, pulling the strings and muttering, "Little did they know," or "as we shall see."
So, to sum things up, second person point of view and plural point of view are pretty cool, but they can be pretty distracting for readers, quite fatiguing to read, and can put you at a certain distance from your intended audience. Third person omniscient can also be very effective, but it's seen these days as somewhat old-fashioned. For newer writers, Tom would recommend either first-person point of view or third-person limited. Those are the viewpoints that most readers and therefore writers are familiar with, and they contain the fewest pitfalls that you might have to deal with. So with all that in mind, for my Southeast Asian trilogy, I'm going to save myself the peptic ulcer and just write it all from the first person. But that doesn't mean, I think, that it has to be all boring and linear. I'm going to use a slightly different framing device for each act of the story. The first part, modern day, will be told in the form of transcripts of TED Talks and political speeches over the span of 5 years. That's the bit all about the succession battle. The second act, set in the 90s, will be extracts from the second president's memoirs, where he'll take a credit for the prosperous growth of the nation. And then the final act, set in the 1960s, will all be handwritten letters from the country's founding father, the first president, to an ex-girlfriend from his university days back in Britain. So without necessarily having to mess around too much with POV, I can still have fun with all these different forms. The framing of each of these first-person narratives will get increasingly intimate as we go further back in time. From modern-day public speaking, where everything is artifice and bluster, to a political memoir where the author/narrator can open up a bit more, but it is still very much a controlled narrative, to the final part where it's all personal letters and the narrator has a chance to open up his heart and be more vulnerable. Now, all of these narrators are likely to be unreliable ones, which I think will be a lot of fun to write and give me enough of a challenge to keep me interested. Well, that's the plan at least. I know I can write reasonably comfortably in the first person, so I won't be falling into the trap of trying to write in a way that isn't completely natural to me, while also aiming to complete a draft. And speaking of completing first drafts, I'd invite you to check out Tom's course on Reedsy. It's called How to Write a Novel, and it will teach you everything you need to know about novel writing, while also guiding you through completing your first draft in just 3 months. It features daily video lessons, weekly masterclasses, and regular feedback sessions with your peers. In addition, you'll have access to world-class book coaches to keep you on track. For viewers of this video, I'm offering 10% off our next class starting October 28th, 2024. Apologies if you're watching this in the future. All you have to do is use the promo code POV24 at checkout and you'll get 10% off tuition fees. Thank you for watching. Do like and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more of this good stuff every single week, and head to the comments and let me know which point of view you like to write in and why. I'll see you next week, but in the meantime, I'm going to try out my new hammer.